Well, hi everybody, and welcome to our 11th Treatise on White Magic video commentary. And we are still in rule number 8, and this is 8.5, which means it is the 5th program in this series on rule 8. It's a hot day here in Helsinki area. Can you believe almost 90 degrees? People think Finland is always cold, but in the summer it can be, quite warm. Well, okay, there is, let's read a little bit. The advanced worldly man is centered in the pituitary region. When through occult unfoldment and esoteric knowledge, the relation between the personality and the soul is established, there is a midway spot in the center of the head in the magnetic field we call the light in the head. Now, this is mostly an etheric field, but I want to make this quite large so we see what it is. There is a midway spot in the center of the head in the magnetic field, which is called the light in the head. And it is here that the aspirant takes his stand, meaning that he focuses. He focuses at that point. Okay. Now let's see if I can. Right. Okay. This is the spot of vital import. And you know, when he uses a term like vital import, he is referring, of course, to the etheric body. It's his way of teaching more than one thing at the same time. It is neither land or physical, nor water emotional. It might be regarded as the vital or etheric body, which has become the field of conscious service. This is coming in the Aquarian age, of direct control and of force utilization. Now, in one respect, he tells us, we have been told that there is no such thing as etheric consciousness, but it seems there is an ability to direct force from this centralization or focus or awareness. So I think the jury is still out on this question of etheric consciousness. I mean, the etheric body is the more subtle aspect of the physical body. It's still on the physical plane. So maybe that's what he means here, but the time will come, especially in the Aquarian age, where 3 air signs are ruling: Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra, and 2 of them particularly have to do with the etheric body, that is Aquarius and Gemini. And in a way, Libra, the 3rd of these air signs, has the ability to pursue or create balance within the chakra system of the etheric body. Now remember, there are other kinds of chakras as well. There are astral chakras and mental chakras, and probably, you know, here's a new diagram that Tuya has worked on from A Treatise on White Magic. There are vortices of force on the etheric aspects of every one of these planes: Buddhic, atomic, the upper 4, monadic, the upper 4, and logoic, the upper 4. Although when it comes to the cities or powers of the logoic and monadic plane, and of the first 2 subplanes of the atomic plane, and the first 2 subplanes of the Buddhic plane, they are so high that they are beyond the capacity of the master. And so he doesn't really mention to us what they are. We really have no idea, except one thing that occurs to me is that in one of the rules, he talks about moving, they onward move in life. They onward move in life, not just in consciousness, but in life. And that deepening identification as life seems to perhaps have something to do with these higher cities, because we are definitely in the esoteric life aspect when we start entering the monadic and the logoic plane. One can only imagine what may be occurring on the cosmic, astral, and mental planes, and whether they are pracritic and made of matter as we know it, or, well, anyway, if Master DK tells us that he has not yet been there, what lies there on that plane, who knows? I have not been there. He basically tells us it's way beyond even our speculative abilities. Okay, so we learn this etheric body becomes the field of conscious service of directed control of the, especially of the physical body, and of force utilization towards specific ends. And I suppose later we develop the ability to use the etheric aspects of the astral plane, and then once the causal body is gone, the higher of the three etheric aspects of the mental plane, we can already use the discrimination of the fourth. And maybe the causal body will leave, and we will have what is called here, let's see if I can find this diagram that Keith Bailey made available to us here. From the Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Whether we will have what we have when we have the egoic lotus, will have spiritual discernment, but it'll be part of our own mental vehicle and higher mental vehicle, and not so much created by the solar angel. Will have response to group vibration and spiritual telepathy. Maybe these cities will remain, but they will not be cities that are in some way veiled by the egoic lotus, which is kind of a shroud to real soul abilities. It's sort of a scabbard for the sword. It's sort of a type of physical receptacle for higher powers. Well, all of these things lie ahead of us, and we have to learn how to experience them. That's the main thing. We can talk about many things and have many words, but to experience, that is another matter. Okay, so anyway, within this spot of vital import, the midway spot, which is neither dry nor wet, must provide the standing place whereon his feet are set, and meaning the point of focus, right? Here the magician takes his stand, and through the medium of his force or energy body performs magical creative work. And say even, what can we say here? Even the brothers of the Black Lodge have great etheric abilities. And they can, work with very much with vitalization and also with devitalization or vampirism, stealing, draining the vitality of their victims. Anyway, we learn how to focus between the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, in the light in the head, or in that area where the light is being generated, whether or not phenomenally we do see it. It's in the center of the head, and I think some people in other occult traditions call it the cave, which seems to have so much to do with the cave of initiation, which would be an externalization of the esoteric physiological fact. So, the mystic is the man of the world is focused in the pituitary body. The mystic, pure mystic, is focused in the top of the head, above the head, and the worldly man in the pituitary, and the occult unfoldment occurs in the middle of the head, between the pineal gland and the pituitary body in an area of the head which is etheric and is the field where the light in the head, that particular magnetic condition, demonstrates. Okay, right, onward. One point is rather abstrusely dealt with in this rule, but it clarifies if the words are studied with care. There's a hint, always. Well, he says you never read carefully enough, so always study Master DK's words, and he would say, with care, you're not careful enough. Now, that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to understand what he's saying next. At the close of the rule, we are told when, that's some sort of adverb that has to do with time, when water, land, and air meet, there is the place, and now we are into location and not time, for the working of magic. Curiously, in these phrases, the idea of location is omitted, well, except for the place, but it's not specific. At least it begins with the when-ness of things and the reference to time. Curiously, in these phrases, and you can only wonder, what he translated them from. Were they in the Censar, and how was it portrayed? But curiously, in these phrases, the idea of location is omitted and only the time equation is considered. Well, there's a question, when will Christ return? Well, he will only return when certain conditions in time and space have been met, and there is no definite time and there is no yet definite location, because of course his consciousness is that of the cosmic etheric planes, which are in a way omnilocal or non-local. Air is the symbol of the Buddhic vehicle. This we learn at various points throughout the teaching. So, when you're looking at the inmost petals of the egoic lotus, they are petals that derived from the Buddhic plane. A downflow of Buddhic energy created those petals. And therefore, if knowledge petals are of the earth element and love petals of the water element, and then the mental petals will be of the fire element, and the synthetic petals created from the Buddhic levels will be correlated with air. Now, how exactly will it go? Will it go cardinal, fixed, mutable? Well, that we can try to work out. Aquarius seems to be the most synthetic of all. We usually end every 3 petals in the egoic lotus with a mutable sign. And are we allowed to do so here? But that is another and maybe difficult question that doesn't have to be ascertained at this. The answer doesn't need to be ascertained at the moment. Air is the symbol of the Buddhic vehicle, or the plane of spiritual love, spiritual harmony, pure reason. And when the 3 above enumerated in their energy aspects meet, that is, water, land, and air, it is indicative of the focusing of the soul consciousness and the centralization of the man in the spiritual body. All right, that's really important. He's told us, as I've often said, that we don't meditate successfully because we're not able to focus within the spiritual body. First, I suppose, the spiritual body being the egoic lotus itself, and next being the Buddhic plane, which would be even a higher type of focus. So it's the plane of spiritual love, pure reason, the plane of harmony. Okay, it's one of the first. It's the plane of wisdom. It's the plane of union, in a way. When the 3 above enumerated in their energy aspects meet, it is indicative of a focusing in the soul consciousness and the centralization of the man in the spiritual body. And from this point of view, I think we can consider the egoic lotus the spiritual body. It's not the only one, because when we coordinate the Buddhic vehicle, that's going to be a spiritual body. When we later coordinate the atmic vehicle, that's going to be a spiritual body. The entire spiritual triad is, in a way, the personality of the monad. And we will also have our own abstract mental vehicle, which is other than the egoic lotus, especially once the egoic lotus is gone. From that point of power, outside the form, now let's just say one way of looking at this is that the form can be considered to be the lower 18 subplanes and their vehicles. From the central sphere of unification and from the focused point within that circle of consciousness, and from one point of view, I won't say the only point of view, but I'll say from one point of view, the JIL, the jewel in the lotus, from one point of view, the jewel in the lotus. So the focus point within the circle of consciousness, which can be considered the jewel in the lotus, the spiritual man projects the consciousness into the midway spot within the brain cavity, wherein the magical work must, in relation to the physical plane, at least in relation to the physical plane, note the physical plane, be carried out. So somehow this is important. We achieve a focus within the soul body and at its very center. Oh, come on. And from there we work. Now, how many of us can do this? Are we still mostly in the recipient mode? We may receive from that vehicle, but we are not steadily necessarily focused within that vehicle, or if we are sometimes, are we totally aware of it? Anyway, from whence is our point of direction? Okay, what is our focus when we are directing energies within the etheric body of our personality? And here it is suggested it should be the jewel in the lotus. That's very interesting, isn't it? You know, it calls for quite a high point of focus for the true white magician. And of course, when we hear the word from outside the form, from the central sphere of unification, that sounds like the soul body. And from that focus point within that circle of consciousness, sounds like the jewel in the lotus. Yeah, the form in this case is the lower 18 subplanes, but really, if we are more accurate, the egoic lotus is definitely part of the form as well. Well, really the whole cosmic physical plane, but when we start to enter into the cosmic ethers, we are entering relatively into the formless worlds. At least upon the cosmic physical plane, there's a world of form. With respect to the planetary logos, I believe it's the lower 18 subplanes. With respect to the solar logos, that world of form or dense physicality is the lower 21 subplanes, and the formless levels are the higher 28 subplanes, at least with respect to the solar logos. Now, it's a question, I've brought it up before, but are the higher mental subplanes with respect to the planetary logos considered in any sense formless? And then when we have, 31 subplanes, 31 plus 18 making the requisite 49 with respect to the planetary logos. Well, we can theorize about these things, but the important thing is to tune in on the energy and be there. This ability to project the consciousness from the plane of soul realization, so that's a confirmation, into that of the creative magical work on the etheric subplanes where this light in the head is found, is gradually made possible as the student in his meditation work develops facility in focusing his attention in one or other of the centers of the body. Okay, so we know from whence we are directing the process, and we are, okay, so from the very center of the planes of soul realization, we are directing chakric activity within the vital body. Now, there's a close connection between the vital body and the soul. You know, we're told the physical body is built atom for atom upon the vital body, and it seems that the condition of the vital body directly reflects the condition of the petals of the egoic lotus. That's a speculation, but I believe it is at least partially correct. Okay, so he works and develops facility in focusing his attention in one or other of the centers in the body. 3 major centers: head, heart, throat, depending on the monadic type, major monadic type, I guess. This is accompanied through the medium of the 4 centers in his etheric body, He gradually gains that plasticity and that fluidity of self-directed consciousness, which will enable him to play on the centers as a musician utilizes the 7 notes of music. And there are many, tones and quarter tones and chromatic tones in Indian music, but I do believe that some of their theory has to do with playing upon these centers. Theory in Indian music, I speculate, carries the idea of playing upon certain of the chakric centers, major, minor, etc. Maybe not minute. You'd have to subdivide the scale too much, maybe, to do that. There are our normal division of the octave in music is about 12 notes, 7 and 5, and usually the 7 are considered major and the 5 are considered minor. I mean, I don't mean major minor in the sense of the major key and the minor key, but important and less important. And then there are subtones, and maybe we can divide those into 24 perhaps, or maybe even 28 to correspond with the lunar mansions. So I think in some of the advanced esoteric approach to music, there are a lot of different ways of playing that music so that the esotericism with which we deal is reflected in the music. Okay. Interesting, and I think, could take your whole life to become that kind of knowledgeable, accomplished musician. We have at our conferences an individual who is very deeply schooled in Indian dance, and it is amazing art and science together of great complexity, which all has to work out on the physical plane. Okay. Anyway, for the master, time and space become their playthings. That's what DK tells us, and we're going to also play on the centers as the musician utilizes the 7 notes of music. It can be improvisatory. It can be always in line with manifesting the plan, playing upon the centers. But the whole idea is play, and it's kind of interesting that when you look at the whole universe, you kind of wonder, is it a drama? Is it a musical composition? Is it painting a motion picture, like, is it a play? I mean, is it the play of the gods, or the play of the higher emanated beings? It carries that kind of artistic connotation when we kind of look at its purpose. I mean, because absolute infinitude has everything forever. So it's not like we could add anything to what is already absolutely present. So then why are we doing any of this? And sometimes the idea of play and bliss and enjoyment and creativity and all of that comes into the picture. So anyway, this plasticity, he gains that fluidity. You know how it is when you change a science into an art, you have that intuitive ability to do things spontaneously and beautifully at the same time. When this has been achieved, he can begin to train himself in wider and more extended focusings, and must learn to withdraw his consciousness not only to the brain, but to the soul on its own plane, and thence redirect his energies in the performance of the magical work of the soul. Well, ultimately, we, the soul, are dealing with soul magic. And whereas we may focus within the etheric brain, and in alignment with the soul, later, as has been hinted above, later we focus within the center of the soul body itself, which is the jewel in the lotus, which is an extension of what we really are as being. So we're going to raise our focus all the time once we begin to have a work with a point of tension from which we can do certain things. We always outgrow what we can do, and then we elevate our focus and can function on various planes. The master himself is the master on the lower three planes, and an avid student and actor on the cosmic ethers, at least on the atmic and buddhic and maybe higher mental planes. All right. Whereas, how about getting that correct? Okay. Well, looks like, oh, heavens, there we go. Sometimes it looks like I just get lost here. Okay, now I want to just do that, and hopefully it doesn't run away from me the way it did before. The fundamental secret of the cycles lies in this withdrawal and the subsequent refocusing of attention, and it must be remembered in this connection that the basic law underlying all magical work is energy follows thought. So energy will follow or be directed towards that upon which we concentrate. And so we'll necessarily energize that upon which we concentrate, for better or for worse, because it's always possible to feed or energy into or give energy where we had best withdraw it. And maybe there are ways too of withdrawing energy. Certainly there's some negative ways of withdrawing energy, and maybe we can vitiate certain forms that do not need to be perpetuated. Okay, well, the fundamental secret of cycles is also found with all knowledge on the atmic plane. So we're withdrawal, let's just say, to higher and higher points of tension, and the subsequent refocusing of attention. And let's just say, in general, the higher the point of focus, path of form, no, point of focus, the longer the cycle. So, our astral body obviously is lasting longer than the physical because it existed before the physical form did, and it will be perpetuated a little after the physical form is dissipated, and the mental body longer than the astral body, and the soul body is, well, virtually immortal. Not really immortal, but lasts for such a long time, millions of years, that we consider it quite permanent. But it's very long, and we're focusing ever on those higher positions where we can see great cycles occurring according to our elevated point of focus. So the secret of cycles, well, not granted, and even then not fully, not granted to anyone but a master. And even then they would say, well, there are things that we don't know, and it's some of the most closely guarded material. We're given certain generic figures, and Blavatsky assures us, well, they're not the real figures, but they're pretty close, because it's possible to figure out too much if we were given the exact numbers, and of course with accurate information. A highly intelligent type can work against the plan, and certainly the members of the Black Lodge, having so much third ray, are highly intelligent. So, and we cannot be yet trustworthy receptacles of that kind of information, because it could be, so to speak, squeezed out of us in some way or another. So the particulars of the great teaching, the facts, the figures, the accurate facts and figures have to be withheld at this point, and only the higher initiate who is really pledged and proven can be trusted with them. Trust is a big deal in advancement in the ageless wisdom. And then who's to say when a master will trust us? They see far beyond what we can see. They see into our tendencies. They see how we could be tested and how we could fail the test. And we don't have any idea that we would fail the test. I thought to myself, what a test it was for these 12 boys trapped in the cave in Thailand, and each one of them finally guided through by two divers. And they've been sort of tied all together, so that the boys could not let go or be released. And then I learned that these boys had been placed under quite heavy sedation, I suppose to avoid the possibility of panic, which could ruin everything and even endanger everybody's life. So it was truly a miracle. I'm still fascinated by it, thinking of all the prayers that we all were sending, and the sending into the light, and the Buddhist monks praying, and the parents praying, and these first-rate types, giving all of their skill and their courage. It was, to me, a great spiritual event. I mean, maybe if you, are listening to this years after this year, 2018, it won't mean much to you, but here, from our perspective, underwater, in the sign Cancer, deep in the cave, it was an exhilarating ending to a situation which rested on the blade of a knife. It could have gone either way. Okay, so anyway, energy follows thought. The basic law underlying all magical work is energy follows thought, and we really, we have to monitor our thinking. Did you ever get a warning, that your thinking was going in the wrong direction? or maybe it was damaging to those on the inner planes. I once got one of those warnings. Whoa, it was a shock, and I responded as quickly as I could. But we do have to, as it tells us in Rule 11 for disciples and initiates, we have to be very careful about the groupings of our thoughts and not mixing them and not allowing into the ashram certain kinds of thoughts which just don't belong, you know. So anyway, energy follows thought. If aspirants, well, the basic law, I've got to make that bigger, don't I? I mean, really, it's so fundamental. And, you know, certain things are being told here to us, which are absolutely the foundation of everything we might do in recreating the world, the white magical work. Right. Okay. I hope that's not degraded. They said that I might be experiencing degradation of sound. Okay, if aspirants would remember this, they would live through their periods of aridity with greater ease and would be conscious of the underlying purpose. In other words, and we all have it, and especially, you know, if you have the fifth ray, if you have the fifth ray, these periods of aridity can be even more acute. All disciples have these periods, and we cannot trust the emotional body at, EMB, the emotional body at such times. Because if we look to the emotional body for some kind of comfort, it is mainly the area where the aridity, the desirelessness, or at least frustration regarding the possibility of fulfilling desire and then not even really wanting the things that seem to be desired, you know, it's the desert experience. And sometimes when I look at that sign Scorpio, I think there's a lot of that can be experienced. If you look at the Jafra illustrations, you'll see that under Scorpio there's a very strong desert theme. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the Badlands of, is it South Dakota? I think so. The Badlands of South Dakota, but with my family I used to drive out there towards the Black Hills, and it was really a moonscape. And you can see that they have done certain films there where they were trying to show life on different planets. Well, it's like a different planet, but not enough water, you know, and water is of the emotions, and the emotions in the usual sense are drying up. We just don't desire the things that we used to desire, and we can't quite achieve, or are not quite sure whether we really want the more spiritually desirable factors. So we're kind of caught between. But there's a great inflow from the wooded plain. It's air, but it also carries the higher implication of water. It's very nourishing, and eventually when we can get into the love part, then all of that aridity will disappear. It might be asked, what are the dangers of this midway spot? I mean, obviously we're dealing with an issue where practitioners have died. He tells us about it, you know. They didn't quite know what they were doing, or they became careless. This is where the seventh ray is so important, that you absolutely follow the rules, you know, and you don't deviate and become spontaneous and all that kind of thing, at least until you're extremely sure of what you're doing. And even then you kind of wonder. So the seventh ray is all about rules, following the rules. And if we don't, we may go the way of many a practitioner who has not been sufficiently respectful of the ancient precedents. The dangers of too violent a fluctuation between land and water, or between the emotional response to life and truth, or life on the physical plane. Okay, now look, remember this water sign, Cancer, the moon representing the physical plane, and Neptune, the water plane, the astral plane. And you can imagine, suppose you have a square there between the moon and Neptune, or an opposition astrologically. There could be the kind of violent fluctuation that he's talking about. Some aspirants are too emotional. Excuse me. I've got to make sure that this is correct. Some aspirants are too emotional in their reactions, and others are too materialistic. I guess it depends on the ray, Obviously, the hardline rays tend to be more materialistic, and the soft lines more emotional. The effect of this is felt in the midway spot and produces a violent instability. So, with overemphasis, there is a related problem in the midway spot. The effect of this is felt in the midway spot and produces a violent instability. Well, that's the one thing I think we don't want in magic, do we? It's all based on magical controls, as it tells us in the teaching here, that the disciple knows some magical controls and so forth, but he has to have that, and Saturn is very much involved. This instability has a direct effect upon the solar plexus center, which was the midway spot in Atlantean times. Now, what do we have here? Even now, it has a meaning of what's it called? It's called the point where land and water meet. It's not called the midway spot, but it was in Atlantean times, and so many of our consciousnesses at this time are still Atlantean in nature. So obviously, different midway spots correlate with the different root races, and we're constantly moving up, into the vehicles, through the vehicles, to find our midway spot, as we have been talking. They're the vehicles of the personality that become the midway spot, and even into the soul, and maybe, who knows, there's always a midway spot somewhere. Even the monad becomes some kind of midway spot, I suppose, between its projection into the lower five worlds and the realms of the planetary logos, of which it is somehow a part. So we have always to be aware of the principle of relativity. So, instability is just not it's not what the magician can abide. Otherwise, things will not end well, and when the forces are out of control, then violent disruption and even death can occur. This instability has a direct effect on the solar plexus, which was the midway spot in early Atlantean times, 12 million years ago, he once says, and is still the midway point in the transmutation process of the aspiring personality. And let's just say this happening today is a reflection of the Atlantean condition. It's that midway spot, the ancient midway spot, but now the point where land and water meet. It's no longer our midway spot. It transmutes and transmits the energies of the sacral center and of the center at the base of the spine. It is the clearinghouse. In the old days of banking, everything had to go through a clearinghouse for all energies focused in the centers below the diaphragm. So, we have a midway spot for our present Aryan civilization. How did he say? Was it kind of the mental nature, and going on into the soul nature and so forth? And we have some kind of etheric midway spot, which is very important in the coming age, which is going to be an age where much attention to etheric process is developed and executed. So we really have two midway spots at any one time, at least we do now, right there within the head, in the etheric area around the pineal gland, and between, let us say, the pineal and pituitary, and then also one of the vehicles of the personality is going to be the midway spot. I wonder, if I went back here, and I never know whether midway. Okay, so where is it? Oh, there's so many. Prisoners of the planet, tortuous midway spot. Midway spot. Okay, initiates of the first degree. Where is this? Okay, most true aspirants are now at the midway spot. Okay, and can either drown and make no further progress in life, stand or so hold the ground gained. Okay, the dangers of the midway spot. Well, there's quite a bit of this discussion of the upward moving midway spot. And humanity is now at the midway point. Okay, this is a little different. Let's see. Okay. Now I feel, let's see. All right. Okay, well, I think, I found it. Sometimes I have to turn off everything. Hopefully it works. For a clearer definition of the midway spot, we talked about this. For the probationer, it is the emotional plane. The Kurukshetra on the plane of illusion, where land, that is the physical nature, and water, emotional nature, meet. Emotional plane, and, implying the solar plexus. For the disciple, it is the mental plane, where form and soul make contact, and the great transition becomes possible. For the advanced disciple and initiate, this is it, the midway spot is the causal body, the Karana Sarira, the spiritual body of the soul, standing as the intermediary between spirit and matter, life and form, the monad and personality. And then he talks about how we did review this. He talks about how this can be discussed in terms of the chakras. Now, I just read just a few minutes ago that the midway spot can be the atmic plane, and that, it can be the buddhic plane. I suppose it can be the monadic plane. Always there is a process that takes us above, and one that indicates our actions below. So we are constantly, by increasing our point of tension, increasing the power, the vibratory intensity, whatever we want to call it, of the midway spot. So as disciples, we have the mental body, but maybe as advanced disciples and initiates, we have the causal body. And there's going to be a point at which the spiritual triad and the different parts of it are considered to be the midway spot, and will, maybe for a master, it's going to be the atmic plane. A midway spot is always a place from which you can launch further spiritual enterprises and serve a greater field of needed activity below. Obviously, if we have a midway spot that's the atmic plane, our service below can be a lot more effective than if our midway spot is the emotional plane or even the mental plane. So we remember, we're always having a new point of tension. That point of tension is a greater and greater intensity of focused will, focused, immovable will held in the presence of a certain vibratory energy. Now, I would say that, DK's material tries to lead us toward the third initiation and occasionally the fourth. And I would say, that a lot of us would be doing very well if we could establish the midway spot as the causal vehicle of the egoic lotus. Now, we would still work in practical magic in that area around the pineal gland within the magnetic field called the light of the head, placed between the ajna and in the center of the head, between the ajna and the head center, or between the pineal and the pituitary. That could be our midway spot, and we would be, in fact, really achieving something. I think that we need now, some of us who've been, working at this a very long time and working in these books, we need to establish a midway spot, which is higher than the mental plane per se. And hopefully we can do that. Okay, so we've been again considering this question of the midway spot. In one respect, it is chakric, but in another respect, it has to do with the vehicle in which the point of tension of our consciousness is focused. So a lot of us have to learn to use the midway spot in the etheric portion of the head, and that wherever we're focused above, if we're focused in the soul or the triad or wherever, and we can direct the magical process etherically from that higher center. Now, that's an art and a science, and probably DK will give us more about that when he again writes on this subject. Anyway, there's too much fluctuation between land and water. And as I said, the moon is land in a way, because it does represent the dense physical body. All those non-sacred planets represent something on the personality side. The Earth is the etheric body, Mars is the astral body, Pluto is the mental body, and the Sun is the whole personality. Those are all those so-called 5 non-sacred planets, but the moon is the very dense physical. So in this fluctuation between land and water, it's the moon and Neptune, and we have to see whether we are the victim of that. It's too much of a fluctuation between the emotional response to life and truth of life on the physical plane, or life on the physical plane. Okay. So we want a balanced condition, and if we don't have it, if we're too emotional or we're too materialistic, we have this violent instability, which is produced at whatever for us is the midway spot, and maybe for a lot of people who are predominantly emotional, they still have the midway spot as they had in Atlantis, and it's going to be in the solar plexus and the astral body. Even the probationer still has a midway spot in the astral body. So it's not something that we have passed by, necessarily. So anyway, this instability has a direct effect on the solar plexus center, which was the midway spot in early Atlantean times. That was a long time ago, but we still have with us today a lot of early Atlanteans, and is still the midway point in the transmutation process of the aspiring personality, which is like a reflection of the early Atlantean period. It transmutes and transmits the energies of the sacral center and of the base of the spine, and is the clearinghouse for all energies focused in the centers below the diaphragm. So the solar plexus is still very important, and and when it comes to certain disciples who are in the seed groups, when in the religious group, in the glamour group, in the psychology group, the solar plexus is still among the chakras, which is directly being used in service. I mean, humanity is by no means beyond the exercise of its solar plexus. It's not in the majority a thinking being. It's a feeling, sentient, idealizing being, but with here and there more and more people beginning to use the mind. The dangers incident to a premature and uncontrolled pouring in of pure spiritual energy to the mechanism of the personality. Now, he's dealing here with certain dangers, right? So one danger was violent fluctuation. Okay, and this is, what can we call this? Danger 2. Maybe we'll call it that, okay? And I'm just kind of drawing this in, and here's another. Here, I'll call this one danger 1, all right? So we can more easily find it if we have to. Okay, now let's see what it says about this next danger. The dangers incident to a premature and uncontrolled pouring in of pure spiritual energy to the mechanism of the personality. So many people think, oh, if I could just contact the spiritual sources, everything would be wonderful, but maybe the personality is just not prepared for that. That vital spiritual force enters through the cranial aperture, at the top of the head, and pours into the head centers, and from them will follow the line of least resistance, which is determined by the daily trend of the aspirant's thought. Now, if they are, some of the lower chakras, we're going to have trouble, but we might just say, in a certain respect, that any chakra can be overstimulated. And trouble lies not only with the lower chakras. The heart or the throat can get overstimulated, and DK deals in esoteric psychology too with the dangers of overstimulation, so it doesn't just have to be one of the lower chakras. Now, here's another one. I'm just going to call this danger 3. I know that he doesn't write this, but I'm interested in not getting lost here, and so we can easily see where we are. Another and rather potent danger is the result, literally, of the bringing together of land and water. Wonder if we have mud then. It demonstrates as the pouring into the brain consciousness, the land aspect, of the knowledges of the astral plane. Well, if we look at the book of Revelation, predicting maybe the immediate future, we certainly do see some pretty terrible things walking the earth, So maybe the astral plane will more and more, especially in its lower aspects, which are sort of the unpleasant aspects, the hell aspects, be visible right here on the physical plane. And already there are people that are bringing that through, maybe even in the rock world, the rock and roll world, and some of this extreme theatricality, bringing through some pretty low apparitions. One of the first things an aspirant becomes aware of is the tendency to lower psychism. This is not necessarily a good thing. It was an old Atlantean ability, and people having it now become quite proud of it, and it misleads them and misleads others. So this is a reaction to the solar plexus center. So, we're trying, actually, psychism and spirituality can almost be considered opposites, because psychism can cover up the spirituality. Okay. It is a reaction from the solar plexus, and maybe the solar plexus has been under lock and key just a little bit in our Aryan age, and the full powers of it, as they were in Atlantis, have not been released in most people's fairly skeptical minds, which DK says is a protection. Skepticism is a protection in the Aryan age. So a reaction from the solar plexus center, but this midway point can be utilized as a jumping off place into the world of astral phenomena. Okay, now, and that, the results are rather unpleasant. This will produce death by drowning. For the aspirant's spiritual life can be swamped and entirely submerged in the interests of the lower psychical experiences. Now, very few psychics deeply engaged in the phenomena they see believe this could possibly happen to them. They believe in the reality of that which they see. It is here that many worthy aspirants go astray. Temporarily it may be, but the times are so critical that it is a matter to be deplored if any time is lost in futile experimentation and the retracing of any path chosen. There was a man, I'm trying to remember his initials. Well, anyway, it was interesting. He was a first-ray soul and a seventh-ray personality and a fourth-ray mind, and I think he had a seventh-ray physical and a sixth-ray astral body. Can't remember his name. I remember his actual name, but I don't want to talk about it right now. And he was retracing his steps, dealing with disincarnate hierarchies, which were all illusory. And it had to do with reclaiming some kind of experiences he had had when he was a monk, and he relieved himself of the boredom of the monastic life by going out onto the astral plane. Well, this also became a tendency in his present work with the group, and it just didn't fit with what DK was trying to cultivate among his close students, and the man had to be, in a way, let go from that area of responsibility in the group because he just was fascinated with these astral hierarchies, and he was deeply, therefore, involved in the lower psychical experience, and therefore deeply clamored. Okay, friends, well, I try to keep these programs down to an hour, roughly. So this is the end. The end of A Treatise on White Magic video commentary number 11. And I don't know what page we're on, page 250. And this is still Rule 8. And we have 8.5, is it? No, this is where I always lose myself. And yeah, yeah, it's 8.5. That's good. So there are 5 programs on this so far. And then we have the beginning of A Treatise on White Magic video commentary number 12, page 250, Rule 8, and it's going to be 8.6. Okay, well, I appreciate your presence. And there's so much to study and to correlate. And I suppose if we were to tell the interested psychic that they risk death by drowning, they would be a little less inclined to follow that retrogressive path that would swamp their real spiritual life. Interesting and a danger. Okay, thank you, and we'll be talking to you on the next occasion, whenever that may be. All the best, and study hard.